Good evening. First item on the agenda is to confirm the appointment of Councillor Frost as Chairman of the Committee for the Council Year 15-16. Is that agreed? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. The second item on the agenda is the appointment of Vice Chairman to confirm that Councillor Michael Goodridge be Vice Chairman for the Council Year 2015-16. Is that agreed? Thank you very much indeed. And then we move on, and then I'm going to come back in a moment, to co-optees, to confirm the appointment of Tenants Panel co-optees, Mr. Adrian Waller, who's Chairman of the Tenants Panel, and Mr. Alan Binfield, Treasurer of the Tenants Panel. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much indeed. Now I'd like to come back to right at the beginning of the paper. Do we have any questions from members of the public? Thank you very much indeed. Then we'll go straight on and continue on the agenda. Before we go to minutes, etc., I would like to welcome to the committee the new members of the committee. If there's anything you don't understand, terminology or whatever, ask. Don't sit there thinking, oh, it'll all become clear in a minute, because it may not. So please do ask. And as observers, we have some members of the executive here as well. Right, let's move on. Oh, and I'm also assuming that you have all read your papers. And you know what that means for those people that have been here before. We don't go through them pedantically. Okay? Thank you. Minutes. To confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 24th of March. Is that agreed? They've been on the table. Thank you. Apologies for absence, Emma.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies have been received from Councillors Peter Martin, Libby Piper and Ross Welland, and this evening Councillor Paddy Blagden is here as a substitute.
Thank you very much indeed. Welcome, Councillor Blagden. Declarations of interest?
None received in advance, Chairman.
Thank you. Under Procedure Rule 10, questions by members of the public. Do we have any?
None received.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay. Then if we move on to Committee Work Programme, item 8, appointment of members to the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Housing Improvement Subcommittee for 2015. I have got so far myself, the Vice Chairman, Councillor Story and Councillor Seaborn. Now that means we are one member short. Does anybody wish to volunteer? If not,
I would be very happy, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. Can you remind me of your name? Councillor James.
Councillor James.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Very warm welcome to you. The Tenants Panel, Mr. Waller, we have yourself, Alan Binfield, Dennis Smith and Terry Daubney, and you are one member short. Do you have a member? No. Let us know when you do. Thank you very much indeed. And can I just remind members, the first meeting of the panel will be on the 7th of September. And the dates are there. If you'd be very kind to put them in your diaries, that will be helpful. We normally have the meeting prior to corporate, so that whatever happens at the Tenants Panel subcommittee, we are able then to report it to corporate. Okay, so the recommendation is we appoint 5 members. We've done that. Is that agreed? Thank you. Development of the committee work programme for 2015-16. Now, I did ask the officers to circulate all of you to see if there were any items other than the normal ones that you wished us to consider as part of the work programme for the coming year, so that we took account of what it was you had to say. Now, we have 2 people, apart from myself, who have indicated that they have some items they wish. Now, the first one, which I've put on this agenda, is review of overview and scrutiny, terms of reference and procedure rules. When we had the trainer here talking about overview and scrutiny, one of the things he did say to the chairman of the 2 scrutiny committees, that from time to time you should review what you are doing by way of overview and scrutiny. Do you want 1 committee? Do you want 2 committees? Do you want 5 committees? I don't know. But we should be looking at what we do. Is there overlap between one committee and another, which shouldn't be there? So one of the things I've asked that we consider is the review of that function. Now, at the end of the day, there may be no change, but all we're doing is, in fact, reviewing it. So that is the first item. The second item is, Councillor Bolton, you've got an item using local authority trading companies. Is there something you wish to say to that item as you put it on here?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, I would like to speak to it. I've spoken with Councillor Welland as well, and I think we have similar views about this subject. Councillors, I come to praise Waverley, not to bury it. Thank you. However, if I was a betting man, I would think it's a racing certainty that the government will cut our income and grants, both in the short term and the longer term. We were expecting a 3 million shortfall anyway before the summer budget. Now we are sure that it'll probably be bigger and we must find new sources of income. The latest copy of this interesting magazine from the LGA suggests 20 billion of consolidation measures. I think this means cuts. And these are due in the autumn spending review. We already know that social rents will decrease by 1%, blowing a hole in our housing revenue account. We found new ways of working and continue to deliver our core services without raising council tax. I think we need some imagination. Some examples in this magazine are Ashford setting up a council-owned housing company to build new homes for rent. Interestingly, Ashford has outline planning permission for a new community of more than 5,000 homes, comparable to a community we might develop. Barking and Dagenham, which is under socialist control, has secured European funding for development. The new homes will be owned by the council's company. Another example of different ways of working is that Horsham and West Sussex, a borough and a county, are sharing facilities and apparently saving money. What I would like to do is to be able to identify existing services which could be outsourced to a trading company. On the face of it, we wouldn't necessarily save much money, but if the company's operations were combined with those of other councils, we might expect some savings. I don't think I'm suggesting that Waverley do anything brand new. I think there are examples that other councils are following. Thank you.
Very much indeed. We are in fact doing a lot of the things that you have actually, we are outsourcing and we are combining our services with other councils. But there are still things that we can do to improve it. So thank you for that. And that is very similar to Mr. Wellen?
I believe so.
Thank you, because Mr. Wellen isn't here tonight. So they are 3 items that we have put forward as possible things that we can develop and look at over the coming year. And have you got any comments on them, councillors? And do you want us to go ahead and put them as part of the work programme? Any views? Councillor Wheatley.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I would think, how many is it in depth are we looking for? 2 is it normally, or is it 3? I was just wondering otherwise, because Councillor Bolton's and Councillor Wellens are basically in the same vein, whether... that could be go as 1. So I don't know if that would help us out. Then do we still need to vote? Is it only 1 that the...
Councillor, you don't have to accept any of these. It's really down to you as members of this committee to decide. These have been proposed as possible development programme for the coming year. Do you want to accept those items or not? Because the officers have said what they're going to do if you accept them. Do we agree them? Thank you.
Agreed, yes, thank you.
Yeah, I would do that. That's fine. The other one that I wanted to add that we were talking about when we had the briefing just now, and that is members who have been here before will remember that we had the joint overview and scrutiny committees go through the department's service plans. It was a quite lengthy evening when we went through all the service plans of all the departments, and it did seem to me that we ought to review those service plans, not in total, but the top 2 priority service plans, perhaps in January, to see how far they've got, what we've done, and whether we're on track to meet whatever was agreed. Would you agree with that? Okay, thank you. And we will also be reviewing the MERS contract, because we've put into place a project plan for that. And I personally would like to know how far we've got on it. So that will be coming to us in September. Okay, and as we go along, we'll just add other things to it. Now, we've also got in front of us the plans for the executive. So if members, you see anything on there that you feel that we ought to have brought before us, and we're just talking about corporate now, then let us know. Okay? Yes.
I think as a matter of principle, we've always had the view that if a policy is coming forward to the executive, we'd like to have a look at it first.
Yes.
And therefore I would say as a general point that wherever we have here a new plan or an updated plan or a new strategy, that we should ask that it be included in our work programme before it goes to the executive, because once it's gone to the executive and they've approved it, it's all a bit late. So rather than noting these things, I think there should be the general principle that as soon as the plan is ready, it goes on to the next corporate overview to have a look at.
Would we agree with that? Agreed? Thank you. Emma, could you add that, please? Thank you. Then if you've got nothing else, I'll put the recommendation that the top of page, unnumbered, that the committee agrees the topics that it would like to include on its initial work programme for 2015-16 and indicates any prioritisation for their future consideration. Is that agreed? Thank you very much indeed. I'd like to welcome Simon Thornton, who is the executive member for leisure, environment and leisure, isn't it, or just environment? For the environment with us today. As you know, at the last meeting we had before the election, we agreed that we would ask the executive to establish a SIG, special interest group, via this committee in order that we could look at the implications of what action we took on the Waden Lane former landfill site. The executive agreed, and working with Councillor Thornton, Councillor Thornton and myself, we have been putting together a group of 5 members who in fact would form that SIG. That does not mean we wouldn't invite other people to join us as need arose. So if we needed something to do with finance, we would ask somebody from the finance department to come and join us and give us some information, somebody from the local community who is interested in this particular site, etc. So the names, and we have spoken together, is Simon Thornton. Councillor Thornton will be the chairman, as the protocol says. I will be on it. My vice chairman will be on it. Councillor Story has agreed to be on it, and one of the local members, Councillor Hargreaves. And that makes the 5. I would hope, working with Councillor Thornton, that we could actually come to a result by Christmas. Would you agree that's possible, Councillor Thornton?
Yes, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. So can you note the membership of the SIG, and we will get on with this particular project quickly. Is it noted, or do you have any comments? No? Noted? Right. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Councillor Thornton. Item 11, Performance Management, Treasury Management Activity, 2014-15 outturn, 15-16 year to date. Right. Please, Peter.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The Treasury Management Report presents the Treasury activity and outturn against budget for 2014-15 and also gives an update on position to date for 2015-16. The report's structured to show investment activity across four aspects. These are the weekly level of investments from week to week, and the graph tracks that for you. Performance in the actual rate of return achieved on the investments. Maturity profile of the investments themselves, of the whole portfolio, which predominantly indicates liquidity of the overall portfolio, and also the investments across the actual risk ratings that we work within the Treasury Management Strategy. All investments are done in line with our annual approved Treasury Management Strategy. The two key objectives for the Treasury Management are to manage risk and to obtain value for money from our cash balances. The year-on-year cash balances are reasonably predictable, as you can see from Annex 2 and 5. From the last couple of years, there's been a build-up of cash balances from 40 million in 2013 through to 53 million in 2014, and it's plateaued out in 2015 due to the completion of big capital schemes such as Hazelmere Leisure Centre and an increase in the housing capital spend. I can confirm that all investing activities within the approved policy of A category risk ratings, Annex 4 indicates that. Annex 3 and 6 shows that the base rates remain static at 0.5%, predominantly for quite a significant amount of time, and the 3-month LIBOR is slightly higher on average and is what we use as a benchmark for the overall investments that we make. That the market is changing, and during the year we've seen that the rates we get for on-call money is reducing, whilst the rates we get for the longer-term investments are increasing. Reflecting this, we have a slight shift from on-call and 3 months to 9 months and a year investments, resulting in us achieving slightly better rates of return. Overall, in 2014-15, there was a target of £500,000 to be achieved from our investment activities. We've achieved an overall outturn of £544,000 over 2014-15 of interest. The performance and the interest trends have continued through to 2015-16, and we're looking for a similar level of income during the course of this financial year. And that's pretty much summing up the Treasury Management position.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Vickers. Anybody got any questions on the report? You've got the report in front of you. I think it's fairly self-explanatory. Yes, Councillor Hess?
Seaborn.
You'll get used to this. I never get names right. Councillor Seaborn.
All right. So, in the comments on Annex 1, it does state that there's been a broadly similar pattern to 2012-13 and 13-14 on the graphs, but in fact the 12-13 from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, and I realise it's a very volatile graph. There was a £10 million increase, £10 million increase. Excuse me, I've just left the oil industry, so I'm used to thinking in dollars. 2013 and 14, there was a £12 million increase from the start of the year to the end. 14 to 15, it was actually down £2 million. From the start of the year to the end, as shown in the graph. And I realise if you take a previous week to following week, you get a slightly different answer. But the the point I'm trying to make is that actually the comment states that the pattern's broadly similar. You've actually pointed out that there's been a flattening off. What this leads me to be interested in is that some of these reserves are much longer term, and some is cash that's being used regularly, and that's the volatility. And I wonder, would it be helpful for people looking at these graphs to be able to see what is held longer term and what is actually the short term stuff that can be managed? Because obviously you can invest those in slightly different ways. Is that clear?
Yes, certainly it's clear. Annex 4, isn't it? Annex 4. Sorry, page 25 actually gives a breakdown of the maturity profile of the overall portfolio at the point in, literally at the year end, 31st of March, and then there's an equivalent one to that at the position to date. The line graph that you see that we've just been discussing actually is just the average cash balance on a daily basis that we're tracking there across the weeks. Is that helpful?
Can I come back? The point I was trying to make is that there's an element of the reserves that we're probably not touching, and the volatility is the reserves that we're actually using. Does that make sense? And so, therefore, you might wish to actually invest in a slightly different way. Does that make sense? I mean, in Annex 1, if you look at 2012 to 13, there's never less than 24 million invested. And at any point over the last 3 years, there's never been less than 24 million invested. So therefore, we're holding those as longer-term reserves. And there's cash that we're using on a day-to-day basis, which is sort of the cream on the top, and that's the volatility. And so cash that you're holding on a longer-term basis, you might want to invest differently. So I fully understand that you've got a difference in the portfolio, as shown in the various graphs. But what's not clear from the Annex 1 is what the proportion of reserves that are being held long-term is compared with what's being used on a short-term basis that's going in and out.
Chairman, maybe I can just add to that. And I do understand the question. I think you're absolutely right. And what we do in our Treasury management strategy that the Council agrees each February is actually take a fairly cautious view about the time period over which we tie money up. And that's partly because I think all local authorities are still very nervous about tying up public money in institutions that took sort of relatively sudden dives 7-8 years ago. And so the council set certain limits about how much in terms of value we can tie up in over more than a year. Now, I think now that the banking world has settled down a bit, and we tend to invest in organisations that are as safe as they possibly can. I mean, it's certainly something we could consider looking at. I think to go beyond a 2-year period would again be probably a leap of faith that members wouldn't be comfortable with. That certainly would be stretching our Treasury management investment strategy. So, but I completely accept the point that there is an underlying level of cash that we have invested at any one time that we could take a longer-term view on and potentially get a better return. But because we tend to invest in financial institutions, of course, there is the risk that if we're locked in on a interest rate and interest rates go up, we are going to get caught in a time lag and regret going too long, because the word is that within 12 months interest rates might start creeping up. So that's another reason for us going short. But let's have a look at it. It's a very good point, and we'll take that back to our Treasury Management panel.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Anybody else? No? Then in which case I put the recommendation that the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee notes the Treasury management activity and investment performance in 2014-15 and notes and endorses Treasury management activity and investment performance in 15-16. Is that agreed? Thank you very much indeed. We move on to housing, and we come to item 12, which is future use of community rooms. Mr. Edwards, I understand you wish to speak on this. I'm going to take the officer first, and then I will invite you to speak. Is that all right? Mrs. Abrahams.
Thank you, Councillor Frost. As you'll be aware, among our housing service priorities are the need to increase the supply of affordable housing, to make the best use of our housing assets and to deliver value for money. So the purpose of this report is to look at how we might use the 13 community rooms across the borough in the future. So we set up a task group and to take the project forward and had a clear plan as to how we were going to proceed. But I have to apologise at this stage that we haven't followed the plan and we haven't spoken to all the ward members at the earliest stage. So hopefully you'll accept that and we can get ourselves back on track. The task group, which comprised representatives from the tenants panel, tenancy and estates team, the development team, community development officers and the portfolio holder for housing, considered the information that was gathered from each of the community rooms on the amount of the amount at which it was used, each room was used, and from that identified those that were underused and had potential for affordable housing to provide additional units. And those were the ones shown on page 34 at Gorslands, Stone Pit, Griggs Meadow and Woodyears Close. So once we've got confirmation from our ward members and the town and parish councils that they are fully supportive of those four progressing, we'll be sending out newsletters to local residents. And those are the 3 points that are the first tasks in our next steps guide. Those actually refer to those four schemes. For the remaining 9 community rooms, we intend to consult fully with ward members, and we will be then subsequently meeting with local residents to talk about what might be the best use for those particular community rooms in the future. Some may be retained and upgraded, others may be underused, others we may be able to work with other community groups to find a better use for them and hopefully to generate an income. So in terms of the next steps, for those that are potentially to be converted, we've now had confirmation from our planning colleagues that they will need permission for change of use. So we will need to go through the executive process to get approval to submit a change of use application. So it will mean the timetable may potentially slip a little bit, but we have prepared the specifications ready for that. In terms of the community rooms to be retained, what I would ask is that we come back, have conversations with the ward members, have conversations with the local residents, and bring another report back to this committee in the future to talk about what we're going to do next and to give more detail about what retaining community rooms actually means and upgrading them, what we're actually going to be able to do. So, again, I apologise for the unclear recommendation, and I'd like to ask the committee sort of two things, really, to support progressing the conversion of those 4 addresses that I've already mentioned, and for further consideration of the other 9 rooms to continue and to be brought back to a committee at a future date. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mrs. Abrahams. It is very disappointing that we got this so wrong. When we get the report back, because we're continuing this, can you make sure that all the dates are correct and it all relates to as we are at the moment in time? You are asking for us to approve the 4 rooms that we've got there, Gorston, Stone Pit, Griggs and Woodyears, without us having had confirmed that the local members were happy and indeed the parish councils were happy. Because that's what you want us to agree, that we go ahead with those 4. I don't, personally, I would be unhappy that we went along with those without the local member having knowledge and indeed the parish council giving their views. But that is my own personal view. Mr. Edwards, you wish to speak?
Thank you, Chairman. You've echoed my sentiments entirely. The only reason I wanted to speak on this matter was the fact that I haven't been consulted, and I don't know how many members have been consulted, but it is a priority that members are made aware. This is a disaster, a public disaster waiting to happen. I can just imagine the comments from some of the active members, active residents about consultation. Can I also ask whether in the breakdown of costs, could we sort of itemise it, allocate it to each particular centre, if possible, so we understand exactly what the situation is with regard to how much it's costing the council, and that all ward members are made aware, and that nothing is done until such time as ward councillors confirm that they have been consulted, because this is an absolute priority. And I can understand how things have slipped because of the election, etc., but really it's back to the drawing board here. I think this should be held over until such time as we have confirmation that full consultation has taken place. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Abrams. Mr. Waller, from the tenants panel point of view, did you wish to say anything?
Hi, yes. Page 33, item 1.8, it states that 2 representatives of the tenants panel met with the portfolio holder regarding this issue, this sort of issue. We didn't actually meet with the portfolio holder at all, so we met with the community development team and the housing development team. We didn't actually meet with yourself.
Can I just say that the very first meeting would have been done in 2013, and it was with Brenda and Anne. So there have been a series of meetings along the way, and this is perhaps the most...
Sort of the recent developments, not 2013.
There have been a series of conversations along the way to sort of to ensure that you're on board at all points.
So I'm in disagreement with... We didn't meet with the portfolio holder this time round. Maybe the 2013, but that's not sort of this new plan, is it? So, okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor James.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. You said that the ward members hadn't been consulted, but on the top of page 34, Annex 1, it says ward members, parish councils and the tenants panel have given their indicative support for these proposals. So, unless I misunderstood that ward members haven't been consulted, then this paper is incorrect.
Councillor Goodrich.
Well, just to say that I'm the ward councillor for the last one, Woodges Close, Wannish, and nobody's asked me about it yet. So I've just queried that actually at the top of page 34, it isn't actually 100% accurate, but what the officers have agreed to do is take back a step and ensure that that happens. And when that's happened, and when you've got green lights for the ward member and the parish council, then you proceed to item 3 on page 34, on paragraph 3, which is newsletter to residents. But the newsletter to residents doesn't happen until the ward member and the parish councils are happy.
Thank you very much, Councillor Goodrich. Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. As a ward member for Stone Pit Close, I welcome the opportunity for consultation. Stone Pit Close is in my ward, I beg your pardon. I welcome the opportunity for consultation. I do have a particular question which I would like to address to Mrs. Abrahams possibly. How can we be so sure that the current use of the community properties are actually underused, particularly when the places may be used day and night? Thank you.
Come back in a moment, Mrs. Abrahams. Mr. Isherwood.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just looking at it, the officers already said they'll bring it back, but we spoke about these committee rooms several years ago in the other council. Nothing seems to have happened really, but when I look at the cost, where repairs come out at nearly 30% of the total, I wonder what the repairs are all about. You know, are the roofs leaking, or is there wanton damage? You know, just what are the repairs all about? So hopefully we'll get a report back fairly soon. Certainly the ward members should be consulted, and the town and parish councils also. So I look forward to seeing the report back in full. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Story.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. First of all, I'm very pleased that Mill Stream, which is in my ward and which I know is very well used, has qualified to be upgraded. That's very exciting. I look forward to seeing what happens with that. But I'm concerned about this newsletter that's going to be submitted to residents relating to these 4. Is this newsletter telling them that it's a fait accompli and that this is actually happening, or is it a consultation? And if it's not a consultation, has there been any consultation with the residents who use these, other than the admirable tenants panel putting in their comments?
Thank you very much indeed. Mrs. Abrams.
Okay, thank you. To start off with the issue about splitting the cost by scheme, that's absolutely no problem. We can easily, that's very straightforward for us to do. In terms of how what the information the task group used to decide on whether a scheme was underused, used or well used, we left clipboards and asked people who used the room to sign in. Now we realise that's a pretty limited way of capturing it, but it was the best way. We couldn't man it at all times because they're very much used. People go in and pop in and use them either for informal coffee or whatever. And certainly that is something that we can do more recent ones if that would be helpful, and certainly would for those that are used in terms of what those here that we've talked about potential change of use. We can do that again. In terms of the newsletter to residents, it was intended as a fait accompli. I think what we find is there is that tricky balance between the need to increase affordable housing and something that's something that a tenant may wish to have available to them, but obviously it's not part of a service charge that they pay for. And we've got to balance all those things around making the best use of our stock, increasing the supply of affordable housing and delivering value for money. And if the ward members and the tenants panel have been involved in those conversations to decide what's the best use for a community room in the future, that was the intention of the newsletter. Again, I understand that it's a very tricky balance. We do that in terms of a housing development perspective for developments on garage sites. We're keeping people informed, we're talking about what we're going to be doing, but very much in terms of increasing the supply of housing, that has to be a priority. We feel that has to be a priority for us. So, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I have anybody else want to ask anything? Yes, Adrian. Sorry.
As a message for Jane, what work has actually been done to find out how to let these buildings sort of in the recent past? I mean, most of the kitchens, all the cookers have been condemned. The boilers are sort of, the hot water systems are not working, and the general cleanliness is obviously not up to standard. But what works have been done to sort of to let the rooms out in the previous years to perhaps get these monies down that's costing? Thank you, Jane.
Thank you. I gather the portfolio holder wishes to say something.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Chairman. I think the conversation one will gather is quite right. This report, and I apologise, should have been sorted out a long, long time ago. Members who've been on this council for many years will recall that these community rooms are a hangover from the days when we had a warden present in the premises. Those days are long, long gone, and the rooms have just been left. Some of them are in an abysmal state, I know, and some of them are really well used. They are getting expensive to manage, as Jane quite rightly says, and some of them would provide some excellent accommodation, particularly for disabled people. So my apologies that this is a mess as well. It is a mess, and I can just like to ensure you and the committee that there will be a lot more focus on this from now on. Thank you.
You've got a community room down here, which is in my ward. And the intention, I understand, is to turn it into a flat for the disabled. It has been pointed out to me and to officers that on that particular small development, you did in fact convert a flat into a flat for the disabled. When that disabled person left, instead of holding it for a disabled person, you converted it back again into a flat for ordinary people. And now my residents are saying, and now you want to take away our community room. We are not happy. So I think we have something of a problem here. And the way I would like to resolve it, which is not going to be terribly good news for the officers, is that we have another committee meeting in September on the 22nd. I would personally like the officers to go away with this report, get it up to date, talk to the people they are supposed to be talking to, and I would like them to ignore the dates they've got here because they're not right, and then come back to us on the 22nd of September with this as a proper, thought-out, communicated report with the people it should have happened to. Because I think to ask us to make a decision based on what we have here, I do not believe it is right. And our job as a scrutiny committee is to scrutinise what is being done of our officers and our executive. So my view is that this matter is deferred for a new report, for the communication to be redone, and for it to be confirmed in the report that everybody has been talked to. To actually say that to Mr. Waller, yes, you were involved, but it was 2 years ago. I don't think that's appropriate. This appears to us to be a current examination of these rooms. So my view is we should defer it to the 22nd of September when we expect a proper report, everybody to have been consulted, and we can make a decision. Now, for me to change this recommendation, if you agree, members, I need a seconder. Thank you very much indeed. Does anybody wish to speak to my proposition? And I must apologise, officers, but it's taken 2 years so far. It can take another 2 months. No, nobody wishes to speak to it. Then I will put the recommendation that the matter is deferred for a proper report for everybody to have been consulted, and at which point we will make a decision. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. I'm very sorry about that, officers, but really. Item 13, homelessness strategy, update year 2. Mr. Rivers, I gather we've got some good news here.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Really as an introduction for those members who are new to this committee, just to explain that providing housing options advice and dealing with homelessness is one of the Council's statutory duties. So it's something that we have to do, and we have to assess if we have a housing duty to people who are homeless, and ideally try and provide them with housing advice to prevent the homelessness in the first place. Also among our statutory duties is to produce what's called a homelessness strategy, and we produced one 2 years ago. It's a 5-year strategy, so this report is an update following year 2. So as Madam Chairman has highlighted, it is a good news report because despite having very high numbers of people approaching us for housing options advice, we have been able to prevent the homelessness for a record number of people. And I must sort of pay tribute to my colleagues in the housing options team, but it's also wider than that because it's a result of multi-agency working. Other housing teams contribute to this, such as the rents team, such as the Don't Lose Your Home project. So it's very much a team effort, but it takes a lot of hard work. So one of the outcomes of preventing homelessness is the low numbers of households having to be placed in emergency temporary accommodation, which is very expensive for all councils. And the report highlights that if you compare Waverley's performance in terms of numbers in temporary accommodation with those of other Surrey boroughs and districts, it compares very favourably, and also to sort of point out the actual costs that will incur for those other councils. particularly one of the councils, has over 70 households in bed and breakfast accommodation, and those costs have to be heavily subsidised by any council placing in bed and breakfast. So it is sort of a good news story. However, there are sort of challenges ahead, which the report does highlight, and in a sense some recent ones coming up from the recent government statements. One of the main ways that we prevent homelessness is placing people into private rented accommodation, and this is becoming increasingly challenging in the area that we live, because a lot of private rents are unaffordable for people who are reliant on benefits. And if you couple that with the fact that the housing benefit limit that housing benefit will pay for different sizes of accommodation is going to be frozen for the next 4 or 5 years, along with the reduction in the benefit cap, I think, just to draw your attention to the fact that, we're into for some quite difficult times. It's going to be hard for us to continue to prevent homelessness, though we're obviously going to do our level best, and I'll highlight one way that we hope to achieve that with. But there's also a strong possibility that the numbers of homelessness could well increase and put further pressure on our service. One of the ways we want to sort of meet the challenge in trying to source private rented accommodation is to try and find out why it is that some landlords will just refuse to take people who are reliant on housing benefit. Often you see on the adverts it says no DSS when people are advertising properties. So we're going to work with the Citizens Advice Waverley. They've got a Lettings with Confidence project that we're going to work with them on to try and, in the first instance, do a questionnaire to a lot of the local private landlords just to find out what are their reasons for not wanting to take people on housing benefit, to see whether we can allay some of those maybe myths as to, they're never going to pay their rent or it's always going to be delayed, and try and dispel some of those myths. But also to the Citizens Advice Waverley may also do things like tenant accreditation. So maybe a prospective tenant for a private rented tenancy, or indeed a social housing tenancy, could do a short course about money management to sort of reassure the landlord that they've got their act together in terms of managing their finances. So that's just one example of where we're trying to mitigate some of the challenges ahead. So, sort of really to sum up, I think it is very positive news in terms of what we've achieved, but I think there are challenges ahead, and that's it really. So I'll be open to questions.
Mr. Rivers, thank you very much. Anybody got any questions? Councillor Wheatley.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Not actually a question, but to say thank you and congratulations, because I know they've helped some people from my ward. I know how difficult it is. I wish them every luck with trying to cope with the new rules that they come in, and to be able to persuade the private landlords that homeless people aren't necessarily going to run away. But I would say they've done very well, so thank you.
Anybody else? Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Can I join everybody else in congratulating the officers on what is clearly a big success story? I've just got a couple of questions about the detail. Firstly, there's a claim of an estimated saving of 3.46 million, which is quite a precise number. Would the officers like to just comment where that came from, just so that we're clear that we're making correct claims? And then the second point was we're getting clearly an opportunity for collecting a vast amount of data with people coming for assistance, and I wonder whether that data is being used to categorise the most at-risk groups, so that proactive interventions can be made for the segments of our resident groups that most need help. Thank you.
Mr. Rivers, have you got an answer?
Sure. Yes, certainly. I'm glad you raised that, because I meant to raise it in my presentation. The figure for 5,300 saving to the public purse was carried out, I think, at Heriot-Watt University, but it's quite an old figure, and that is the most conservative figure in terms of the saving to the public purse. Organisations such as Shelter would put 20,000 as the figure. So this is, we're not trying to blow a trumpet too much on this. We've actually settled on the lowest saving to the public purse. A lot of organisations would think it's at least 20,000 in terms of that. in terms of the data, and it's something that the housing strategy, what we come across is sort of what are the reasons for homelessness. And in fact, one of the main reason for people approaching us as homeless is actually an end of an assured short-hold tenancy, which is a private rented tenancy. And that is one of the, and those reasons can be variable. It could be because of rent arrears, but it could be because the landlord just wants to, with the property market now picking up, they may have been renting out their property and now they want to actually reap the benefit of an increased property market. So often it can be through no fault of a tenant approaching us as homeless. And the other common reasons are things like relationship breakdown. That can be a common reason for homelessness. So they can be wide and varied, and often it is through no fault of the applicant. But the challenge we have is that if they're going from a tenancy where the landlord has been happy to accept housing benefit, we're then faced with a household where we've got to try and source an alternative landlord who's prepared to take that household to prevent homelessness. I hope that helps.
Anybody else? Yes, certainly, Mr. Roberts.
I hope you don't mind, but just to sort of reinforce where the performance of that team sits. So Jane and Mike worked together on this, and in terms of homelessness prevention, the best in Surrey. We don't have figures for the south of England, but probably the best performance in the south of England in terms of homelessness prevention. It's quite extraordinary, but it's absolutely not a reason to rest on our laurels. There are examples of many councils who for a number of years have achieved good performance, who in recent years, even in recent months, actually homelessness figures have increased significantly. So it's something as a council we have to maintain a very close eye on. And I think particularly the challenges that Mike Rivers mentioned, but there are more on the horizon because it's really a demand and supply equation. If we don't have the supply of affordable housing, our own council housing, the housing that's available through social landlords and the private sector, then as demand continues to move upward, we will find ourselves in a sticky position. And I think members are aware that of recent announcements as part of the budget, which will impact on the supply of council housing and housing association supply in the future, including extending the right to buy. And once a property has been purchased, it comes out of the available housing that we can place people in, but also the requirement to sell off our highest valued properties when they become void, impacting particularly on a borough like Waverley with high property prices. And that could see a significant reduction in the supply over the coming months and years. So the challenges ahead are significant, but we have a strong team in order to manage that on behalf of the council.
Thank you very much, Mr. Roberts. Delighted to hear that. And I think we're all aware that we have a strong team because we do get some very good reports coming out about what we've been achieving. So that's great. Anybody else want to make a comment? Then in which case, can we note the report, and the comments we wish to pass to the executive is our thanks for the good news story and to keep up the good work. Is that agreed? Thank you. Item 14, again, Mr. Rivers, you're coming into your own again. Implementation of introductory and flexible tenancies for new council tenants. It's an update report. Over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, this report is really giving an update on the introduction of introductory and flexible tenancies that were introduced in September of last year. The major benefit of these new types of tenancy is that the council, at the end of the first year, it's really the tenancy is a bit like a probationary tenancy, just to see how well the tenant has settled in. Are there things that the council need to do in terms of addressing any repair issues, but also is the tenant managing? Are they managing their finances? Are they paying their rent? Are they conducting the tenancy in terms of their relationship with their neighbours in the correct way? So that's the introductory tenancy, followed by a flexible tenancy. And so with these opportunities for reviewing those tenancies, it means that the council is able to maximise its stock. And the reason for that is if at the end of the 5-year flexible tenancy the household is smaller than it was at the beginning. For example, kids have left home and there's just a couple living in a 3-bedroom house. We would have the power then to review that tenancy and actually have that conversation with those tenants and say, actually, we can help you move to a 1-bedroom property, or you might be able to, your finances might be different now that, in fact, you'll be able to secure your own property through your own means. So we've got that opportunity to review that and take that property back. And that's not a power that we have with existing secure tenants. And just to make clear that with these powers of giving an introductory and flexible tenancy, this is something only for new people who become our tenants. We're not able to apply these to existing secure tenants. But obviously, over time, the more properties we let year on year, there's going to be a greater number of these introductory and flexible tenancies, which means we're going to have greater control over our housing stock. So that's so the report is really an update on that, and really just to point out some of the anecdotal feedback from some of the teams. Certainly the rents team have found that it's certainly concentrated people's minds to know that they're on an introductory tenant in terms of addressing any rent issues. The fact that, and with our tenancy and estates officers, the fact that they've got far more involvement with the tenants early on. There's certainly scheduled visits after 4 months and 7 months where they can visit the tenants, ensure that the tenant is living in the home. You know, it helps us deal with subletting and things like that. So these are really positive things. And in terms of my team, you would think that maybe if people are not getting as secure a tenancy, you think that maybe the demand for these types of tenancies will be down. But in fact, when people are bidding for properties, the numbers are really comparable. And when we do a viewing and explain to the new tenant that they're not going to get a secure tenancy, it's going to be a flexible and introductory tenancy, they're still positive about it because they realise that why we're doing it, and it is so that we can have more control of our stock, because they know how long they've had to wait for a council property to come up, and the fact that over time we're going to have more family-sized properties coming back is seen as a really positive move, even though for them personally they might prefer a bit more security for their own tenancy. And that in a sense leads on to the appendix of the report, which points out some of the dynamics of the housing register, and it also points on how long it takes for someone to actually bid successfully. It's an average of 4 years for someone to actually be on the housing register and actually be able to bid successfully. So that's really the gist of the report, but I'm happy to take questions.
Much indeed, Mr. Rivers. Anybody got any questions on the report? Yes, Councillor Bolton.
Just a brief one. We have not yet reached a 5-year break point in any of these tenancies because they only started quite recently. Are we absolutely confident that new tenants understand the meaning of the word flexible?
Work has been done on this, let me assure you, and I feel sure they all understand the meaning of the word flexible, even though we've just introduced it. There's been a lot of training done and a lot of discussion with tenants. Councillor Wheatley.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I must say I welcome this. I think it's so sensible. Not only with the introductory, to make sure from both sides the tenants are happy that things are working, but also that we're happy that the tenants are holding their responsibilities. But I think it's a brilliant idea, especially when people start talking about bedroom tax and all the rest of it, that just because people have gone in their 30s, they can't assume that when they're 80 and they're on their own, that they can still occupy the same 3-bedroom property. And actually we were having this conversation only yesterday, I believe, Madam Chairman, that in the private sector you'd be getting sons and daughters saying to the elderly relative on their own, don't you think it's about time, mum or dad, that you downsized? And up till now, that hasn't been happening. So I think it's a brilliant idea. I know it's going to take a while before we really see the effect, but I welcome this.
It's certainly happening in 28 Burnhill Road. Councillor Story.
How is your new flat? Couple of things. I'm intrigued on page 72 that somebody living in a 1-bedroom flat or a 1-bedroom property is seeking to downsize. And I wonder what they are going to end up with. The other thing is, if I may just crave your indulgence for a minute while I relate a personal story, and then I'd like to ask the officers' comments about how we would deal with that situation. My godson's mother-in-law has recently lost her husband. She lives in a 3-bedroom flat in another area and has been visited by the council, who have gone through her finances and told her that she can no longer afford to live in that flat and that she must move to a single-bedroom place. And I just wonder what our officers would do in a similar situation.
I mean, firstly, to say, whilst we don't have these powers to insist someone in a secure tenancy moves, we certainly would want to encourage it, and this is why we have the Easy Move officer to try and help particularly elderly people who the whole thought of moving, that's often what can put someone off. They might feel that they can manage in a smaller property, but it's just that the hassle and what it takes to move. So that's where the Easy Move officer comes in. In relation to the statistic, I would imagine that was moving from maybe a general needs 1-bedroom property to maybe a sheltered property. So that's probably, and that's why the Easy Move officer again would help, because it would be an elderly person who they're just trying to help with that move. But I appreciate it. It looks a bit strange on that. But certainly, Madam Chairman was mentioning about or Councillor Wheatley about the so-called bedroom tax, the under occupation charge. It can be, for those under pensionable age, it can be totally unaffordable for someone to be in a 3-bedroom property. So in a sense, the housing benefit rules almost forces them down the whole route of having to downsize. But that doesn't apply to people of pensionable age, so who are secure tenants. So again, we give them the highest possible priority, Band A priority, if they're moving from a 3-bedroom to a 1-bedroom property. But we can't force people to move, and but we would certainly encourage them, and often it's in their interest too, because if they're struggling with managing stairs, we can offer a ground floor property that can maybe better adapted for their needs. If they can't manage a garden, 1-bedroom properties have far smaller gardens, or they might have a communal garden where they don't have that responsibility. So yeah, we try our best to help people. I hope that's answered. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Rivers. Anybody else? Then, in which case, can I put the recommendation that we note the progress in implementing introductory and flexible tenancies and the ongoing management of these tenancies? Is it agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. Item 15. Mr. Wagstaff's going to be doing this. HRA Asset Management Strategy 2015 to 2020. Over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Waverley has just under 5,000 homes, which is a valuable asset in 2 aspects. Financially, bricks and mortar land is a very, very valuable asset. It's also a valuable asset in terms of the health and well-being of our residents. And so therefore, you have to look at our asset management strategy, social housing management strategy, in quite a wide range of objectives. Firstly, the strategy is looking to ensure our homes meet our residents' needs, and also not only their needs currently, but also plan for changes in needs. And as the demographic changes, people getting older, living longer, we need to take that into consideration. We also need to actually ensure that our homes are well maintained. We also need to make sure that our properties keep their value. We also need to make sure we're delivering value for money when we're maintaining our homes. And we need to make sure that they're safe for our tenants to live in. The strategy has been informed not only from data from about our stock, our bricks, and mortar, but it's also about data about our tenants, about not only about them, but about their opinions, about their views, and how they see where we should be going with our stock. The paragraph 4 on page 76 really gives a nice summary of the scope of the strategy, and I'm not going to repeat that. It's just to emphasise this strategy is a framework for making decisions in future, in terms of making decisions whether we should dispose of a property, where we should reinvest our money, and it's to give a steer to external changes. It was written before before the election, before the budget, the recent summer budget, and the proposed housing bill that is due to come in, when we are going to have the extended right to buy, and we may need to sell off a number of our properties. But to some extent, the plan understands that. So on page 87, we actually confirm that we're aware that low rent increases over a number of years could seriously jeopardise the amount available for capital investment, and a need to keep this under review. Also, the plan has a risk map, and again, this is on page from 137. And in that, we understand the financial risk on page 140, and we understand that we need to keep abreast of changes in the government policy. So there are substantial challenges already to the plan since it was written, but I think we need to take those in our strides, actually understand those changes before we do any rush changes. As officers, we need to constantly monitor the risk map, see where the challenges are, see where the risks are, and respond accordingly. I feel the document still stands up as it is, and it will help us, guide us through the challenges that we need to meet in the coming years. So it's not something that's set in stone, it's a guidance for us to move forward. So therefore I do ask members to follow the recommendation that they endorse this draft asset management strategy and pass any observations to the executive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wagstaff. Any comments that you want to? Yes, Councillor James.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. For a new person, on page 90, which is the right to buy, you say that there's a risk possibly of losing houses if they've been done up and they're more attractive. Presumably we could have or I don't know if there's a policy that if it is reduced by possibly up to 70%, that the amount of money that you have just recently put in presumably should not be discounted by 70% because they wouldn't have been in it for 3 years or whatever it was. So you'd have to have a different, I'm not a financial wizard at all, but common sense would tell me that if it's recently been improved, that you should not be discounting the increased value of the property.
I mean, we would discount so that it would be valued, and the discount would be on that value of that property. Okay, so and then the maximum discount is £77,000.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bolton, did you indicate?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I welcome this report, especially as it's very useful for new councillors. But I'm concerned about the assumptions which go to make up the gross income from renting houses. I will not discuss page 119 in detail, but it seems to be fundamental to the whole business of where does the money actually come from, and the top line of that shows the estimated gross dwelling rent, and it has obviously made certain assumptions. We know those assumptions are now wrong, and I'm concerned that if we had more correct assumptions, this would dramatically change the final picture. And I would like, actually, before I approve it, I would like to see some attempt at showing the figures with different assumptions, particularly the reduction in
Thank you. I'm going to
rents.
ask Mr. Goodridge, who would like to answer this.
Well, not necessarily answer it, but of course on page 119, it is the 30-year business plan as at March 15. And of course, although indications have come from the Chancellor as to what he might like to do, we haven't seen any legislation, and obviously certain councils, including us, are very unhappy about it, and who knows whether it's going to happen or not. But I think what the Housing Department have taken into account is the fact that there are risks, and this is one of them, and selling off of housing association properties will also make a dent, and having to sell our most valuable stock will make another dent, and you can put in 101 different permutations, but all we can deal with is the law as it is at the moment, and what is our 30-year business plan, which is a factual matter that this council has already agreed to. It is a factual piece of work. If I could just comment on two things which I have mentioned. We talk about the pre-war, and we don't mention which war, and depending how old you are, you might depend on which war comes to mind. I would have thought we'd just say pre-1939 would at least make it very clear what we're talking about, and I'm not sure how many properties we do have where we've got to do a detailed survey or stock condition of how many we've got in pre-1939. And the other thing on Appendix 6, which I have mentioned to Mr. Wagstaff, is the voids situation. We talk about, in Appendix 6, the 14, 15 figures on how voids occurred, but we haven't commented at all on Project 20 objectives as a factual information of where we're starting from. This Project 20 objectives, which is basically normal voids will be less than 20 days, and historically, for those that weren't on the council last time, we really had some fairly horrendous void periods, and it is something which I know the tenants panel and the housing subcommittee are very concerned about, and we put it on the agenda all the time. It seems to me, if one's producing a strategy for 5 years from now, it would be useful to at least put down a marker where we are at the moment. Are we meeting it? And I suspect under the 5 categories on the top of page 132, the days, depending on the type of voids that have occurred, will be very different. For example, if you've got a void due to a death of a tenant, you can't go in early to have a look because you haven't anticipated the death. And it just occurred to me, and I don't know whether this is possible, the strategy, just putting some basic figures of where we are now, it rather implies from Project 20 that we've actually met it already, and it's just a question of ticking along as before, and I know we haven't met it, but I think it would be helpful at time of publication to at least have a rough idea of how successful we've been or not.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Clark.
Chairman, just to pick up on Councillor Bolton's issue around the assumptions, and to echo what Councillor Goodridge said about, we are hoping that there's still some doubt as to whether these measures announced in the budget apply to Waverley, but if they do, then it is much bigger than the normal range of assumption changes that we're used to. It's so significant that when we do get clarification, and we've written to MPs, the Prime Minister, the Local Government Association and lots of other people, when we do get clarification, if it does apply to us, then we will need to come back to members as soon as the summer is over and present a range of options for balancing the business plan in the light of the impact, which is so significant that we will be faced with some difficult decisions. So that's where we're at. I'm hoping that we get a response when the impact is being played through to the government that is favourable, but we've got our fingers crossed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clark. Mr. Isherwood.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. First of all, just thanks to the officer and portfolio holder for this excellent draft report. It's remarkably clear, but when I look at page 99 and the garages, the conditions of the garage in Waverley is generally poor. I would say generally appalling. But 80% of the garages are either rented to private individuals or a void. Therefore, when it comes to the result that 8 sites have been identified at low occupancy and high development potential, my plea is, could the ward councillors be informed of this? Again, something we're missing out on. I mean, this garage block looks like one on our ward. In Hindhead, it probably isn't, but this one looks almost too good. So can I make the plea that we are asked about it?
Councillor Ishwood, it's a very valid point, and I think the point needs to be taken on board by officers and indeed by the executive, that if there is anything that affects a member's ward, the member must be told and must be involved. Too often we find out about it. We've had one example tonight on the agenda, and we really mustn't be in that position. Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Wheatley?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I wonder, please, whether the officers could remind us, when we have sold a property on right to buy, what kind of percentage the council is now allowed to retain? Because I know in the old days, the government used to nick 75% of it.
There you are, Mr. Clark. You've got a question to answer.
Well, it varies, I'm afraid, and there's a complicated formula now which has replaced the flat rate pooling. We don't keep a lot of it, so and there are restrictions over what we do keep. So it's arguably not much better than it used to be, but it does depend on the particular house now and you know, age, etc. So we still don't keep the whole proceeds, I'm afraid.
You're muttering there, Councillor Wheatley. Thank you very much indeed. Anybody else? Yes, Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I welcome Mr. Clark's assurance about possible revisions.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, Councillor Siebel. Got there.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. A couple of points. Firstly, on page 100 of the briefing material, there are estimates for the potential increase in the aged population in the borough. So that covers the total aged population. Would the officers like to comment on their assumptions about the percentage of that percentage that the council should actually be worrying about? Because obviously, you know, there's a sort of private sector and a public sector in terms of care for the aged, and in terms of knowing how big a population we really have to worry about, there must be an estimate available. So I guess that's the first point I'd like to make. Second point is that on the health and safety piece on page 102, there's no mention anywhere of slips, trips and falls, which according to ROSPA are the most common accidents which can cause serious injury at any time of life, with the risk increasing with age. And every year more than 4,200 children are involved in falls downstairs, and 4,000 children under the age of 15 are injured falling from windows. So I do think we're possibly a little remiss in not having a strategy included in this document for worrying about the number one cause of accidents and incidents in the home. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There is a health profile of Waverley that has been produced. Do you want to say something about it? Because I don't think members have it. I've got a copy.
Please, Madam Chairman, yes, there is a profile developed by Public Health that relates to Waverley, and profiles that relate to the clinical commissioning group for Guildford and Waverley and Farnham and East Hampshire. It's a really good question. Waverley has one of the largest older populations in the whole of Surrey and one of the fastest increasing over 85 population. If you look at the report on page 100, the over 85 population is projected to increase by 29% up until 2020, so a very large increase. It's important to note that while the council provides housing, as people become older and their frailty increases, they often have to access a wider range of services. Services provided by adult social care, services provided by our health colleagues. And what we're seeing is the council and the housing service working increasingly in partnership with those other agencies. That might be to provide telecare and telehealth services. It might be to facilitate visiting district nurses and community nurses and other sorts of provision, aids and adaptations, for example. And I anticipate that over time, the work that we do with those other partners will only increase, not least because there is a very clear direction from health colleagues to care for people as they get older in their own homes, rather than in specialist residential and nursing care, and certainly not for people to be cared for long-term in hospital, because those aren't particularly healthy places. And so I think this is a general trend that we will see more of as the strategy is implemented.
Mr. Roberts, right at the beginning I talked about us looking at our 2 scrutiny committees. This is a classic example of us starting a project in corporate and talking about housing and assets and then moving straight away into health because the two are interrelated. I do wonder whether we ought to have perhaps a joint meeting at some time of the 2 committees when we talk about health and well-being, so that everybody understands where this all fits in, because we can't ignore it, and public health does come into it. So can I leave it with you, Mr. Roberts? Thank you. Anybody else?
Sorry, Madam Chairman, just something occurred.
Mrs. Wheatley,
beg your
can I
pardon.
just stop you for a moment?
Apologies, I just
Mr. Wagstaff.
Yes, the comment about slips and falls I think is a very good one, but it's something we've discussed quite a bit, and I think if we put it into this document, it will make us focus and do something around that. So we'll add that to the document.
Councillor Wheatley.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Sorry. While we're talking about the council's property, I don't know if this is the right juncture, but I wonder, please, if we could mention again about some of our keenness to have estate walkabouts. Even if the council can't manage with officers, whether the tenancy panel and councillors might be able to wander on their own, please.
If I might say so, Councillor, in my ward we still have them. So I don't think they have been totally discontinued, because certainly on the Beldham estate we have them. Councillor Ramsdale is very keen to go on estate walkabouts. So can I suggest you talk with your officers? Anybody else? Yes, Adrian.
Hi, just a quick update, that last comment you said, Madam Chair. It's, Chairman, sorry. It's my understanding that the Tenants in Estates team is under a bit of pressure at the moment, and the introduction meeting of about a week or 2 ago in this chambers, I spoke to Councillor Wyatt Ramsdale regarding the walkabouts, and everyone agreed that the tenants panel and councillors should do the walkabouts instead of the tenants in estates at the moment until the tenants in estates get on their feet, sort of thing. I don't know if that's something that the officers wish the tenants panel to pursue, or I don't know. Thank you.
Seems to me that it does fit very nicely into your role, and working with councillors it would be, and I'm sure the officers would think it's a great idea. But we do need a report on what we're finding somehow, somewhere. Anybody else? Then, in which case, Mr. Wagstaff, can I say a very big thank you to you for your report. It's generated a lot of interest, and we are asked to endorse it. Is it your wish we endorse it? Thank you very much indeed. We can now move on to item 16, Housing Delivery Board. Mrs. Abrahams.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. This is an annual report. Oh, Chairman. Oh,
Chairman.
sorry. That's why I called you Councillor Frost last time, because I couldn't remember. Oh. The Housing Delivery Board annual report is a review of the achievements in delivering the Council's housing development programme. So it's a backward look. The key achievements from last year, I think worth highlighting, is obviously remodelling of Ralston House. That was a great achievement. Embarking on the regeneration of Oxford Ridge. We converted 3 units of staff accommodation in sheltered housing to provide an additional 3 affordable homes, and bought back 6 properties, former right-to-buy properties, as part of our property purchase programme. We became a partner with the Homes and Communities Agency so that we could access some external funding, and we've got planning permission in the pipeline for another 123 new homes. So the detail is here in the report, and we also talk about a forward programme for 15-16, not 14-15, that gives an indication of the things that we'll be doing for the future. In 2012, when we started our development programme, it was from a standing start. So last year we didn't achieve, any of the new developments weren't completed. But this year there'll be 23 new homes completed as part of our new build programme. So thank you. I'll take questions.
That's excellent, Jane. Really good news. Councillor James.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Sorry for being a pain in the neck. On page 154, 2.8, you purchased or repurchased some, obviously, former council properties. Is there anywhere that I could find out, because it might be exempt, that were they bought back at less than the cost that they had been bought by, presumably the right to buy with a percentage discount? If we bought them back at the full, that I'd be interested to know, to scrutinise why we then had to pay a full market price to buy them back. If they are then let out again, and they're then allowed to be bought back in 3 years' time at a discount, I'm not quite sure, unless I'm completely barking up the wrong tree, that is really value for money if we're losing out twice. So there must be somewhere, but it might be exempt. Therefore, I'm happy to talk to the officers at another time. But for new people, it might be something of interest. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Councillor, could I suggest you take it offline? Unless somebody's got the answer?
Yes, basically we buy it at market price, and we do let it again at a social rent, and potentially it could be sold again. So we can be stung twice over. However, at the stage when we started out at the beginning, with the whole self-financing arrangements, we felt it was really important that we got some quick wins, which is why we set up a programme of hopefully buying back a total of 12 properties that were more expensive than building our own, but the lead-in time to build our own and the worry that money might not be available for us for the whole period of time was the reason we chose to do that. So it's harsh, but that's how it is.
Thank you very much. Councillor Story?
So just following up on that, is there a reason why buying back, if we're buying back at market rate, why not just buy any house rather than one that was ours in the past? I can't see any logic to that.
It's only about what we can afford, because in terms of the market prices, those that have been previously owned by the council tend to be cheaper than properties in the surrounding areas. That's why. But no, you're right, we don't concentrate just on ones we've had before.
Councillor Bolton?
As a principle, it does seem curious that we're effectively making gifts to various private individuals. I wonder whether we could review this at a later stage.
A lot of what happens in the housing field is by statute, and we don't always understand how we arrived at the point we're at. So, yes, Mike.
I presume some of the properties that we buy are to ensure we've got all the housing in a particular block, so that we can redevelop the block.
We do.
And therefore some of them may, for example, relate to Oxford Ridge. So that if you're wanting to redevelop, you can't have an odd private house in the middle of it, which would ruin the overall plans. And therefore, there is a good reason sometimes for buying back a council property.
Councillor Wheatley.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I noticed Mrs. Abrams was saying about 100-odd plans already on the books, as it were. Do we think that our finances, before the Chancellor messes with them, might actually manage to get these houses built, please?
Mr. Clark.
As I said earlier, Chairman, we will need to bring options back to members, and one option might be that we have to revisit our new build programme, and that's what housing associations and other stockholding councils are doing up and down the country right now. It's looking at a Plan B scenario, so that if these measures are all confirmed and go through the legislation process, that the size of dent in the business plan means that we've got to look at everything, and it may well be that we have to put on the table looking at our new build programme, scaling down, stopping, whatever the option is, but we need to get some certainty around it first, and we haven't got that yet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clark. Anybody else? Then, in which case, I'll put the recommendation, notes the work undertaken by the Housing Delivery Board in 2014 and 15, and our thanks to everybody who worked on it. We move now to exclusion of press and public. I have no items coming under this category, and I declare the meeting closed.